All right, let's talk about a pretty wild idea. What if you could build a special zone, like a test kitchen, just to fast-track the future of AI? Well, that's exactly what we're digging into today. It's this concept called special economic AI zones, basically dedicated spaces designed to totally supercharge artificial intelligence.
And it really all boils down to this one central question. How can we move faster with AI, really accelerate innovation without accidentally unleashing total chaos? The people behind these special economic AI zones think they have the answer to this incredibly high-stakes problem. So let's break down how it's all supposed to work.
So first things first, what exactly are we talking about when we say a special AI zone?
Okay, the formal definition calls them jurisdictional carve-outs. So what does that mean? Well, think of them as specific areas, and they could be physical or even virtual, that get their own unique set of rules. We're talking custom laws, different financial setups, and their own oversight, all with one single purpose: to hit the gas on AI development. They're basically experimental labs for both technology and for policy.
You know, the best way to think about this is probably as a regulatory sandbox. Picture a special playground, right? It's just for AI developers. Inside, they get access to all the coolest, most powerful tools and way fewer restrictive rules. This lets them build and test things that would be super difficult or maybe even impossible anywhere else. But, and this is the key part, there's a really strong, carefully monitored fence around this playground to contain any experiments that might go wrong.
So, how do you actually build one of these sandboxes? What's the architecture, the blueprint that makes the whole thing tick? Let's take a look.
It really comes down to 4 foundational pillars. First, you give the zone special jurisdiction. That means it gets its own legal authority. Second, you write custom laws just for that zone, for stuff like who's liable if something goes wrong, or how you get approvals. It just makes everything faster. Third, you create special governance, which is like an adaptive rulebook that can change as the tech changes, and it's watched over by an independent group. And finally, number 4, you set up digital borders. Think of these like firewalls that control what data and what experiments can go in and out of the zone.
But look, building one of these zones is not easy. It is a constant balancing act. Every single design choice involves some kind of major trade-off. For example, how do you push for rapid-fire innovation without risking public safety? How do you drive all this economic growth without creating an isolated, unequal little bubble? These are the really tough questions that the designers have to answer.
Okay, so we've covered what they are and how they're structured. But what's actually happening inside one of these zones? What's the whole point of this so-called innovation engine?
Well, first and foremost, it's an AI development hub. The idea is to concentrate all the talent, all the computing power, and all the data in one place with these more permissive rules. And the goal, to dramatically, and I mean dramatically, shorten the time it takes to go from a research paper to a real working AI model. It is all about speed.
But it's not just about research. These zones are engineered from the ground up to be a commercial pipeline. They have these built-in fast tracks, like special rules for intellectual property and incentives to get to market, all designed to get new AI tech out of the lab and into the real world as fast as humanly possible.
And that brings us to the economic logic behind all this. The vision is for these zones to become economic multipliers. They're designed to pull in foreign investment, create a ton of high-skilled jobs, boost technology exports, and hopefully create these knowledge spillovers that end up benefiting the entire economy, not just the zone itself.
Now, you can probably guess that with all this speed and power, well, it comes with a lot of risk. This is a very high-stakes gamble, so we really have to look at both sides of the coin here. The incredible promise, but also the very significant peril.
On the one hand, the promise is absolutely huge. We're talking faster innovation, huge economic growth, and a chance for governments to actually learn how to regulate AI effectively. But on the other hand, the peril is just as big. A failed experiment could create a systemic risk to everyone. Companies could just use the zones to dodge normal regulations, and you could end up with deep inequality and massive accountability gaps. It's a real double-edged sword.
So, the whole thing hinges on how you manage that risk. The source material puts it perfectly. The deregulation inside a zone isn't a free-for-all. It's experimental liberty. But, and this is the big but, it comes with conditional accountability. So, you get the freedom to try new things, but you are absolutely responsible for the outcome.
So how do you enforce that accountability? The answer is validation. This is the other side of the coin. Things like independent verification, audits, and getting certified, that's the price you pay for all that experimental freedom.
It's the core mechanism that's supposed to make sure that the liberty you give to innovators doesn't end up hurting everybody else. All right, let's zoom out for the big picture. What happens if these zones start popping up everywhere? What would a world with dozens of these competing AI zones actually look like? How would that redraw the global map?
For this to work on a global scale, there are a few critical things to keep in mind. First, we have to remember that even the best sandbox reduces risk, it doesn't eliminate it. Second, for any of this to succeed, it needs strong backing from stable governments and a solid rule of law. Also, on a global level, countries are going to need to coordinate, otherwise you could just get a race to the bottom on safety standards. And finally, the benefits have to be designed from the start to be shared broadly, not just hoarded by a few people inside the zone.
And that leaves us with one final, really defining question. As we move forward with this idea, we have to decide what these incredibly powerful new things will become. Are they going to be collaborative laboratories working for the good of all humanity? Or will they just become these isolated islands of unchecked corporate and state power? Honestly, the answer to that is going to shape the future of AI for every single one of us.